Helen said, all right. So just like what Dr. Helen said, if you could just type in the country you're in or the university you're currently in, and we're really interested to know that. I know some of us, but of course, since everyone is from different part of the world at the moment, so we really want to know that. So we are going to be starting right now. My name is Jimmy Uba. I'm the chair for the AfriSnet Graduates Community, rather. I am currently in Oklahoma State University for my PhD in Industrial Engineering and Management. That being said, you're welcome, everyone. Welcome once again to one of the webinars that we've been able to organize as the AfriSnet Graduates Community. AfriSnet is a non-profit organization that has a vision of increasing the overall participation of Africans in global and modern research in STEM projects. And we've been able to achieve this by, one, offering students research and professional training. We've also been able to achieve this by empowering students from disadvantaged background through mentorship, and also through promoting Africans and US research collaborations. And for more information about AfriSnet, because we are a body right now and we are growing over time. So if you want to know more information about AfriSnet, you can check out the link that I am providing right now in the chat box, or you can just send an email to the email that the email address that I just provided in the chat box. And we're hoping to hear more about you and your interest in AfriSnet. That being said, over time, we've been able to mentor over 30 graduate students who are currently in so many universities all over the world. We have graduate students from United States. Majority of us are in United States, just like I am. We have people from Canada, people in Canada currently, people in Germany, to mention but a few. And the community of these graduate students have teamed up. We are called the AfriSnet Graduates Community, and we organize so many webinars that we think that are really important for graduate students in general. And one of these webinars is what you're currently in at the moment. It's about 3 minute thesis, because we noticed a lot of people from a lot of PhD students or graduate students in general often have the issue of trying to summarize their research project or research work to non-expert or non-specialist. And so we felt it was very important for us to create these webinars that would help us to provide more insight about it. And that being said, we have an icon currently in this webinar that's going to be helping us demystify the aspect of 3 minute thesis, Dr. Jan Hallen. Dr. Jan Hallen is an Associate Dean for Academic and Student Affairs at Cornell University. Prior to Cornell University, she was a faculty member at the University of Tennessee. And from the year 1982 to 2002, man, it's a long time. And she was also an Assistant Dean of the graduate school from 1997 to 2001. She was also an Associate Dean in the Graduate School of Northwestern University 2002 to 2005, the Associate Dean for the PhD programs at Columbia University 2005 to 2012. She received a PhD in Child Development from Purdue University, and currently her current research, writing, and most profound or most recently funded grant projects, focuses on children's political socialization and on graduate students mentoring and research ethics. She's the author of The Productive Graduate Students Writer. And you must agree with me at this point that she's an icon, and she would be helping us demystify the aspect of 3 minute thesis. So please, while I step back and welcome her, if you have any questions during our presentation, kindly, you could either write it in the chat box or you wait for the question and answer part of the webinar, where you can either come off mute or, just write it in the chat box, and we'll be happy to, I'm sure she'll be happy to answer all your questions. So ladies and gentlemen, kindly welcome Dr. Jan Allen. Dr. Jan Allen, I would step back at the moment and let you take the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. And thank you, Gabriel. I'm really honored to have been invited and to be here with you today. This is very exciting for me. And it's been very exciting to see, as you put in chat, where you all are. Because in a minute, I'm going to show a slide very quickly, and you're going to see how we already have connections in some ways that you probably don't even know about yet. So thank you so much. What I want to do is talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is 3 Minute Thesis. We have, for 10 years now at Cornell, done a 3 Minute Thesis, pivoting to a virtual online from an in-person event for the last 2 years. And I just love when our students present. I just get so proud, and I just think we have the best students in the world. And then when I go to any other school to view online, I think their students are the best in the world. And I just think the very best students, engage with 3 Minute Thesis, even if they start from a place of, I can't do this, I get too nervous, I won't be good. But that's part of our job in the graduate school, is to go through a series of steps in preparation and preliminary rounds to pick our finalists for the final round. I will tell you, if you're at a school that is doing or will soon do a 3 Minute Thesis presentation competition, it's a lot of work for those people. And every time we do one at Cornell, I say, this is the last one. I'm not doing this again. This is too much work. And 3 days later, I'm planning the one for the next year, because I see how much fun it is for the students and how rewarding it is. And I'll tell you more about that later. So I have a few slides I want to share, but I'm going to try to go through the slides and then move away from them, because I would rather see you, see your faces. For those of you, it's Saturday morning. I mean, who gets up on Saturday morning and wants anybody to see what they look like? So you don't have to put your camera on at all, but at least I can see your name. So let's see. Do I have the ability to share my screen? Have you given? It looks like I can, right?
Yes, you should.
Okay. Let me know if you can't see a slide. Gabriel, I can see you and Jimmy. Can you see the slides?
Yes,
okay.
I can. Yes.
So
yeah, we can.
Okay. And I want to, as Jimmy was doing that great introduction, I want to make sure you all know you can call me Jan. I tell our students that at Cornell, although I do remember, Jimmy mentioned I was a faculty member for 20 years at University of Tennessee, and I remember the day and the student and everything about the first time a student said to me, when I said, oh, please call me Jan, rather than, Dr. Allen or Professor Allen, and she said, oh, no, I can't. You're too old. I didn't want to hear that. And I definitely didn't think it was deserved, because I had just turned 40 and I'm a lot older than that now. So please call me Jan. But if you're not comfortable, whatever you're comfortable with. Okay, so this is a quick slide. Let's see. Well, I do have my email address on this first slide, and I'll put it into chat later, because I have something I want to hear from each of you about via email. So at some point, I'll make sure you have it. Yeah, this is just a quick slide, not to repeat the bio, but to wonder if our paths have crossed yet. It's all the schools that I've been at, and I see that at least one of you is from University of Florida, one of you is from UBA. University of Tennessee is also in the South, and I hate to say it, but in the US, we often group our schools into things like the SEC, the Ivy League, the Big Ten, the Pac-12. Those are football conferences. Those are sports conferences. And so I I guess it makes sense from a sports realm to group schools, your peer schools, or those in your conference. But I know that University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa and University of Florida in Gainesville are all part of the same football conference and the same group that we use in the US. So it's fun to see you. And I know one of you is from not UA Tuscaloosa, but UA Birmingham, and that's where the medical school is. And that's where all the smart people go. So I'll just leave it at that before I, and one of you is from SUNY Stony Brook, which I know quite well because my mother-in-law, when she was lived in Patchogue, New York, which is very close to Stony Brook. And whenever I would get lost, and sometimes on purpose, I would drive through the Stony Brook campus. So it's good to see all of you. And I feel like there are probably more connections, although over time, I probably haven't crossed paths with you, but I may have crossed paths with your parents, and I hesitate to say it, with your grandparents someplace. But I'm glad I'm crossing paths with you today. Okay, as I said, I love to talk about 3-minute thesis, and some of you probably know a lot about 3-minute thesis as you've been thinking about this, as you've been preparing for it. But I want to give credit to Queensland University in Australia, who held the first competition in 2008 at their university. And it's grown now to, I think, over 300 schools in 70 countries are doing 3-minute thesis competitions. What you may not know, and I don't want to embarrass anybody with this story, and you'll see why I said that in a little bit. The graduate dean at Queensland University in 2007, 2008. Okay, here's the embarrassing part. He was taking a shower one day, and in Australia at that time, there was a huge drought, which, you know, we still experience in many places in the world right now. But people in Australia were told to limit their showers to 3 minutes. Get in the shower, run the water for 3 minutes, and then you're done, because there was so little water at the time. And while, again, the image, the graduate dean was in the shower, and he thought, I wonder if our graduate students could take the length of a 3-minute shower, 3 minutes, to present their research. That's how 3-minute thesis started. So hope I didn't offend anybody. Do not think of your graduate dean in the shower, but that's how 3-minute thesis started. And I don't know how many people know that story. It is on their website, so I don't mean to offend. But 3-minute thesis all over the world, hosted usually by the graduate school, sometimes by career service or another office on campus. All of us have the same goal, and that's to help graduate students present their research to a non-specialist audience, succinctly, concisely, briefly. 3 minutes is not a long time until you're standing up in front of 500 people presenting your research, and it may feel interminable, just forever, but succinctly, clearly, and enthusiastically. You're actually selling this idea of how important it is for you to do stem cell research that helps to prevent cancer, for you to do your research and then publish and disseminate. And some people, get patents and get jobs and get lots of benefits themselves from the research they do, but the research is also benefiting the larger society and the global community. Research on vaccinations, research in immunology, on viruses. Speaking of drought, climate science and climate change research. There's just so much important research going on in institutions by graduate students. And this is an opportunity for students to begin to practice, because you may get in an elevator one day. This may have already happened to you, and somebody says, oh, you're a student. What do you do? I'm a student. So what are you researching? And many people tell stories about at the university, they get in an elevator, they talk about their research, and it turns out to be they were in an elevator with the president or the chancellor of the university, or a member of the board of trustees, somebody of great importance to the university and the university leadership. And they've just had an elevator ride length opportunity to tell somebody about the impressive work they're doing. I hope many of you will have opportunities to be interviewed by various media, radio, TV. Maybe you will write a letter to a newspaper, editor of a newspaper, and your letter gets published. Lots of things get published easily online, but there are really good reasons to be able to explain your research in simple ways, including if you ever write a grant proposal, a proposal to get money to do your research, graduate fellowship application. You need to convince people who may not be as expert as you are in your research. You need to convince them to give you money to fund a lab. As Gabriel was saying, in the future, having your own lab, getting money for space and equipment, and to fund students, postdocs, graduate students, even undergraduates, to help you do the important work, the research you're doing. So I'm a big believer. I don't think it needs any more convincing. I'm a big believer in 3-minute thesis, and I just love to see students compete. And most of the time I listen to students and think, oh man, I was never that good. I never could have been that good presenting my research in 3 minutes. And then sometimes in the privacy of my office or home, I try to do a 3-minute thesis presentation on my own just to see if I can be half as good as our graduate students. How many of you have seen a 3-minute thesis competition, either in person or online? I'm gonna, okay, I can't see. Really quickly, keep your hand up. And I think you can use the button or your actual hand if your camera's on. At least some of you have. And so we're going to watch a 3-minute thesis presentation today. And I'm also going to give you the link because the University of Queensland in Australia, they started very early on. After they did their local competition, they began to branch out. And now they have a Transmania competition that involves Australia and New Zealand. And then as other universities got involved, there are now national and international. There's an international competition in the United States with all the schools in Canada. And I think we have somebody from a Canadian school, I can't remember. Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So it's a North American competition hosted by the Council of Graduate Schools. So there's lots of opportunities to participate, and most of these competitions have prizes. Some of them give out to the top 3 winners a total of $5,000 in cash. One school gives a $5,000 research grant to the top winner, and then I think it's $3,000 research dollars to the second place, and then $1,000 to the third place. So it can be very beneficial in financial ways too. Plus, I promise you'll have the undying gratitude from your graduate school dean and whoever it is on your campus who sponsors and goes to all the hard work to prepare these. Okay, so before I show you the next slide, does some of you want to type in or just unmute? We're a small enough group, we can talk, we can even talk all at once. What do you think are the skills and characteristics that distinguish the very best 3-minute thesis presentations? I've already mentioned, they need to be succinct, they need to be brief. Can you do it in 3 minutes or less? And I'll tell you, some of the schools have a rule that if you go over 3 minutes, you're disqualified. I have never been able to do that. When our judges say something like, this student was 3 minutes and 3 seconds or 3 minutes and 10 seconds, I say, leave that student in the pool and let's see who the top 5 winners are. And if the top 5 winner includes the person who went over 3 minutes, we'll have to make a decision whether it's fair to let this person, have a winning position. And the one time somebody went seriously over by about 10 seconds, she didn't end up in the top 5. So we didn't have to make a decision. But you can see how hard it is for some of us because you've gone 1 second over 3 minutes. But a skill, being able to do it, practice it, time it, know that you're going to be under 3 minutes. You're not docked for being 2.5 minutes. You just lose a valuable 30 seconds. But so now that I've given you some time to think, what are the skills and characteristics you think that distinguish a really good 3-minute thesis presentation, whether you've watched one or not? Gabriel, you raised your hand, so I'm going to call on you if you don't mind.
Sure.
And there's no wrong answer.
I feel like it can't be too granular, right? In other words, just enough details to get the message, the main message out, but not too many details that people have to spend too much time trying to understand what you're saying.
Yeah. I said there's no wrong answers. That might be the best answer. Yeah, you're going to think about your audience. Every presentation you give, every article you write, at some point in the process, and I would say many points, the beginning, in process, and when you finish, when you're ready to present your 3-minute thesis presentation or ready to submit an article, have you written it for the audience that's going to judge it? Whether it's an editorial board at a journal, whether it's an audience of family and friends at a 3-minute thesis competition. So it can't be, I love that. It can't be too granular. You have to talk about it in a way, because man, all of us in our research, we can go down this proverbial deep rabbit hole. We start talking about something that is complicated enough or exciting enough that we go on and on and on about something, and we lose the narrative of the story we need to be telling. A story, beginning, middle, end. Okay, who else raised their hand? Or let's see, did somebody put something in chat?
Can I go?
Esther, yes. Hi.
Hi. So I think the person should be able to present a very compelling graphical image of the story they are telling, because I believe the audience would love something that would actually be appealing with the eye. It shouldn't be too complicated, but it should be something simple enough to understand the underlying concept of your 3-minute presentation. So that's what I think.
I'm so glad you mentioned the graphic component. When we think about a 3-minute thesis competition, we spend a lot of time thinking and worrying and fretting about what we're going to say. But the slide, the graphic image, is so important. The first year we did this at Cornell, one student said, I'm not going to use a slide. And I said, but I think you have to use a slide. He said, no, I'm not going to use a slide. And all of a sudden it was the dilemma we didn't know how to deal with. But since then, I have seen, I don't know if you're familiar with Laurier University in Canada, but I was attending a conference up there that started the afternoon of the morning. They did their campus-wide 3-minute thesis competition. And one of the best slides I ever saw, it was in the humanities. And it was a black and white photograph of a very run-down, multiple, what do you call it? A boarding house kind of thing, a 3-story building that might at one time have been a 1-family home, but now it was various apartments. Black and white photos. Some of the windows were boarded up, some of the windows were broken. I mean, we could probably look at this picture and tell a story or write a story, just what we imagine the life of that building had been when it was first built, how beautiful it was, what must have happened for the building to begin to look like it did, and what about the lives of the people who lived in that building over 200 years. It's a huge building, very wealthy family must have built it or lived in it in the beginning, and now each room was probably a residence of somebody. But the student showed that picture, and immediately, I think, Esther, you used the word compelling. Immediately, it compelled the audience to want to hear, what is this about? I mean, this is a very bleak picture. What are we going to hear about? Last year, I heard a 3-minute thesis competition done by a student at another school. There was a slide, but the slide was all white. There was nothing. You might say there was nothing on the slide except the color white. Okay, I'm getting a little choked up thinking about this presentation, because it was a presentation about race and how for many people, they live in a world that values whiteness, that sees only white. It was just such a compelling story. And I know you all are in a STEM field and you're thinking about charts and graphs and reagents and arrows that show the direction of reactions. And you're thinking about explaining something very complicated using your slide. Well, give yourself some time to prepare a slide and then edit your slide and edit and edit and edit. Because I got to tell you, the simplest slides sometimes have been the most compelling. And I'm gonna tell you 2 sentences in a minute as an example of the way somebody started their presentation, that after these 2 sentences, there's no way that I'm not listening. It's like, okay, you have me. You have me after 2 sentences. Can your slide do the same thing? Can the slide go up and for a brief second, people are looking at that slide and then they're leaning forward like, I don't want to miss what Esther's going to say. I don't want to miss what Alexander's going to say. Okay. Anything else you want to add? Just unmute if you will. And if somebody sees something go up in chat that I'm missing, you let me know. Okay, I'm going to go to my slide. Okay, where I've listed some things. Okay, a strong presentation, a winning presentation, has an engaging, attention-getting beginning. Okay, so Jimmy said my field was child development, developmental psychology, which is the most interesting field because everybody was once a child, right? Some of you have children. So something in child psychology, child development has to be good, right? Because it can take you back to your childhood or take you to your current parenthood or impending parenthood or hoped for parenthood. And I always say, I'm glad I wasn't a math major. I don't know how to make math interesting. But I've stopped saying that so much because my mother was an 8th grade math teacher. Because she was a woman, I often didn't call her a mathematician, but I should. I should have said she was a mathematician who happened to teach 8th grade math. And she was a really good teacher. I don't say that just because she was my mother, but I grew up in a very small town. And if your mother taught school, you probably had your mother as a teacher because there were not that many, there's only one 8th grade math teacher. But I try not to pick out subjects like chemistry or math, where I think it might be hard to grab people's attention, but that's your challenge. And you can do better than I do. But let me tell you about some beginnings of 3-minute thesis presentations I've heard. This is the one that I heard 10 years ago, and it has stuck with me and I'll never forget it. A young man, a graduate student from New Zealand, started his presentation this way. He said, what if you woke up every morning and you knew you might die? Okay, that got my attention, right? His second sentence was, and what if I told you that my research could very possibly save your life? Like, you really have my attention. I'm going to listen to that. And then his presentation was on the work he was doing, diseases of the lungs, particularly cystic fibrosis. And it's true, people, even young children, die from cystic fibrosis. And I thought that was a very compelling way to start a presentation. Here's another example. This was actually not a 3-minute thesis presentation. I was reading it at Northwestern University in a graduate student's application to become a presidential fellow, to get a big fellowship from the president, the university president's office for her last year of graduate school. She was in the humanities. And I know probably none of you are in the humanities, but I use this example because you may have a story to tell that students in the humanities, in the language programs, in the literature programs, in the social science humanities programs find easier to tell. So it may be a bigger challenge for you to think of what is the story? And you're going to begin that story drawing people in so they can't not listen. But she started her fellowship application, and I'm sure she gave presentations and started this way. Imagine Walt Whitman. Now imagine Walt Whitman dancing. Walt Whitman was a classic, very famous writer in America in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And if some of you are Walt Whitman experts, you correct anything I say about Walt Whitman. But he produced literature that included characters who had disabilities, and he himself had a disability. So it makes a lot of sense to say, now imagine Walt Whitman, and I imagine an elderly white man dressed in garb of the 1800s, writing and looking very like not happy. I mean, people, I think, were told not to smile in pictures in the late 1800s. But, you know, I have a picture of Walt Whitman. And then when she said, but now imagine Walt Whitman dancing. Like, why would you imagine somebody like that, a very almost soured-faced, serious, great American writer dancing? And then she went on to talk about her research on American literature, maybe American and British literature, that depicted people with disabilities, which is a fascinating area of research and studies. So do any of you, you know, in like 10 seconds, want to practice the beginning of your 3-minute thesis presentation and show us how you're going to grab people's attention? I don't see any hands raised yet. I'm not, and if I'm missing somebody let me know. But at the end, we'll have time. And if somebody has been working on a 3-minute presentation and you want us to listen to it and give you feedback, but the number of you that are in the room, I'll make this offer to now. I can't make this to students worldwide, but if before you do a 3-minute thesis presentation, if you want to do a Zoom call with me, as one more person you're going to practice in front of, because you're going to practice in front of your friends, your family, your peers in graduate school. I hope your advisor will let you practice. But if you want me to give you some feedback, we'll do a Zoom call. And I will let you know how wonderful you are, but then I'll give you some hints, maybe, if there's anything you can do to improve. Okay, second thing that a good presentation does is it tells a story. You know, think about anything you read. Usually I get hooked on a book in the first 10 pages, and then it's really hard if I'm not hooked on it. I'm really talking about works of fiction, but there's some wonderful works of nonfiction that read like this can't be true. The story about Henrietta Lacks. What's the name of that book? It has an orange cover and a picture of her from the 1950s on the front of it. Does anybody know the book I'm talking about, Henrietta Lacks? You're in biology, you've heard of HeLa cells. HeLa, H-E-L-A cells, HeLa cells. Over the years, Henrietta Lacks's name was lost to history. And some people said HeLa cells stand for Helen Lane or somebody else, but it was actually, it's a hard story to tell. Henrietta Lacks was a Black woman in the United States, Virginia in the 1950s, and she was discovered to have, I think it was uterine cancer. She went to the doctor, they discovered cancer. And she just didn't know how she would deal with or pay for. She never went back to the doctor. So she was kind of lost to history, except for the fact they found that her cells, okay, any of you who are biologists, you've got to correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but they found that her cells were reproducing, you know, like in a petri dish. They were growing and reproducing faster than any other cells they had ever seen. And so her cells now, they say, but she's been dead a number of years. She died from cancer because she didn't get the medical care, probably because she was a Black woman in Virginia. She didn't get the medical care that she needed. And her children and her grandchildren were eventually brought into this story and said, but the doctors, the medical center, the medical schools, the biology labs around the world are using cells that were cultured from the original cells they scraped off her uterus to diagnose her with cancer, because they have the ability to replicate. And I guess when you're doing biological research, cells that can reproduce more quickly can speed up the research. Am I correct or I'm totally wrong saying that?
It's
I'm
true.
not a biologist. Last
That-
time I
that-
had biology.
That is
I don't-
correct.
That's correct. Okay.
Yes.
So they think that in the book says you can touch almost any surface in the world. And you're touching Henrietta Lacks. You're touching the history and the legacy that she has given us. Well, anyway, why did I start telling that story? Oh, okay. So that's a work of nonfiction, but it reads like a novel. Because like this can't really be happening, right? There can't be a woman whose cells have been used in research all over the world. And there are companies that manage to get certain kinds of patents using the research done with her cells. And then they sell that. And her family, continue to be poor to middle class, the branches of the family. And there are companies making millions and billions of dollars. Like this can't be real, right? Okay, if I've convinced you, you need to read that book. This is what you're going to give me your email, and I'm going to mail you or send you an e-copy of that book if you want to read that book. It is so compelling. I was really lucky. When I was working at Columbia University, the author of the book was booked to give a talk at Columbia University on the day the book was released, and the New York Times had a review of it. And at that point, she was only charging $4,000 to give a talk. And then the book became a bestseller. Oprah Winfrey made it into a movie. So if you don't have time to read the book, you can watch the movie. But Henrietta Lacks. So you Google that and you'll read about it if you don't have time to read a book. But I just think this is one of the best books I've ever read. And if I had read it in high school or college, who knows, I might have changed my major to biology. Or stayed in the social sciences and done more with understanding the history of underrepresented and even mistreated people in this country. And there's a long, terrible history of that. Okay, so think about how you're going to tell a story that Henrietta Lacks' book tells this wonderful, almost unbelievable story. Many graduate students tell a story about their research that you just want to hear more about. That's one of the best things. If a 3-minute thesis presentation ends and you want to hear more about it, not because it's incomplete or not because it was confusing, but oh my gosh, that's so interesting. I often do that when people are talking about water quality research and soil and crop science. We have all these programs at Cornell. If you're at a university that has an agriculture school, our school at Cornell is called College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. And we have this kind of One Health mission, and that is we study soil, we study the crops that are grown in the soil, we study the food that comes from the crops grown in the soil, we study the nutrition, the transportation and storage and distribution of the food that's grown, comes from the crops that's grown in the soil. And we also have public health programs that look at how we can use all that we know from all of your fields, most all of your fields of research, to improve the health of people, communities around the world. And that was almost a story, right? If your research is at the tail end of, you work with public health or you work with food and logistics, marketing and distribution, does your story start with soil quality or crop quality, disease prevention? But be thinking about, like, what's the most fascinating story you can tell from your research? And as part of that, if you can, include something about yourself, the storyteller, the speaker. You don't have a lot of time to do this in a 3-minute thesis presentation, but it's the piece that will speak to both your qualifications for doing this and your passion for doing it. So just one sentence, maybe. Students often say, when I was a child, I wondered about. A lot of 3-minute thesis presentations involve telling about a family member who was ill or a family member who died. And from that, they began an informal study and wanting to understand something about cancer, something about cystic fibrosis. But see if you can work in a sentence or two about yourself, because that can be compelling. Now, if it doesn't work for you, don't do it. I read a lot of graduate fellowship applications, and almost everybody has a story about something that happened to them in elementary school that sparked their interest. And sometimes when everybody has a third grade story, they lose their impact. So spend some time thinking about what is it about you telling this story, your lived experience, your field work, your research itself. You know, many of us go do research, and after we've collected and analyzed the data, then we look at the story, right? From the graphs and the charts and the narratives, the article we write, and we realize there's something more interesting there than we set out to answer. And it becomes a second study or a small piece of our research, or we have the time because we didn't start writing the thesis or dissertation at the last minute. You know, we have time to do some pivoting and get to, this is why I say, and I say this to myself every day, stop procrastinating. If you've got 10 weeks to write a journal article, get it written in the first 2 weeks. It's the 20-80 rule. Get the writing of any draft done in the first 20% of your time. The last 80% of your time, revise and edit, because revise and edit includes, you never know enough about your research until you've written the first draft. So don't take forever to write the first draft. That's what we do. We save a little bit of time at the end, maybe a day or two if it's a paper. If it's a longer paper, we may save a week to do editing and revising. 20% of your time that's available, that's allotted before your deadline to writing, 80% for revising, because you will never know as much about your topic as when you finish the first draft. Because thinking about your research, doing your research doesn't get you where writing about your research gets you. Writing about your research, you know where the unanswered questions are. You know where the gaps in your knowledge are. You know where you have to go back and read more articles or add more theory. You also know after you write that first draft that, wow, I just answered my research question, and it's not the most interesting data that I ended up with. So you can pivot because you've left yourself time. Okay, that doesn't have much to do with 3-minute thesis, but I just felt compelled to tell you that. Okay, your 3-minute presentation, whether it's 3 minutes, 30 minutes, or a marathon, day-long presentation. Somebody said, I want you to talk about your research for a day. It's got to flow in some way. Very often we tell the story chronologically. You know, our research is a chronological story. We come up with a question, we develop hypotheses, we design a study, we collect the data, or we analyze, you know, previously collected data in a new way with answering a new question. And then we report and disseminate. And most stories are told that way, and that's fine. But there may be another logical way for you to tell your story. I remember one student gave a 3-minute thesis presentation, and she started by saying, my sister lived. My sister lived. Well, yeah, I'm going to want to know what happened before that, so that you're having to report that your sister is still alive. And so this was a sister who very young as a child got cancer. And the sister doing the presentation then talked about her experiences, her interest in doing cancer research, and translating that cancer research in ways that clinicians, doctors, nurses who work with cancer patients are more supportive and transparent in their clinical work with patients. I will say one thing I didn't like about her presentation, and it wasn't anything I was planning to put on a list or tell you about. She was very negative about the care that her sister got. And that's what I remember about the presentation. If I remember 3 things, she started it by saying, my sister lived, which I thought was a great start because I want to know, but that was not a chronological. She started at the end. My sister is alive. And then she went back to explain why it's important to know her sister lived through all of this, but she was very negative about the doctors and nurses that her sister came into contact with. And my reaction to that, you may have a different reaction, but my reaction to that was try to reduce. I mean, I was watching a final presentation. I wasn't coaching her or anything, but my feeling was she should have reduced the negativity, because in my mind that translated into a lower score because she was just so negative. And there are ways, you know, if we have time at the end and you say, but what if you're writing a fellowship application, or what if you give you a presentation and there is something very negative, and we can talk about how to state that and then make it more constructive, move it into something that reflects on your resilience, or, you know, the person you're talking about, their resilience, what they learned from that, rather than the continuing bad feelings that clearly this presenter had even on the day of the presentation. So think about and outline your presentation. You know, there's another slide where I say, write out your presentation, not just so you can rehearse it, but before you practice it verbally, write it out and edit it, just like you would a paper you're writing, to make it concise and clear. Because I think a lot of people don't write out their presentation. They do an outline, they have some notes, because it's 3 minutes, right? Why do I need to write out what to say for 3 minutes? I know what to say. But write it out, and then just as you would in a written paper that's going to be read by an audience, you know, in writing rather than spoken, edit it. And we can talk more about that if you have questions about that. Gabriel already said this. It can't be too granular. It has to be clear and understandable to all in the audience at some level. One of my favorite child psychologists, a Harvard psychologist called Jerome Bruner, who died just a few years ago, has this quote that I learned in graduate school. And by now you may realize how very long ago graduate school was for me. But Jerome Bruner said, you can teach anything to anybody. And he went on to say, to a child at any age, if you use developmentally appropriate language. And so think of Jerome Bruner and think that, I'll use myself as an example. Last time I took chemistry was 49 years ago. Don't be doing the math. Don't be doing the math. 49 years ago, I took college chemistry. And I didn't like it because I just didn't like it. I wanted to say he's not a good teacher, but you know, maybe he was a good teacher and I was not a good student of chemistry. We're getting close to time to stop, I know. Well, let me talk, but anyway, think about you giving a presentation if you're in chemistry, thinking about me, who hasn't taken a chemistry class in 49 years, who didn't like the last chemistry class she taught. I liked my high school chemistry because I liked my high school chemistry teacher. So what does that tell you? But think about making a presentation to me. So I'm the proverbial 6-year-old when it comes to chemistry. Oh, and electrical engineering and mechanical engineering, and probably earth and geological sciences. So many of your fields, well, some of those were physical science fields by name, but think about giving the presentation to me. How are you going to make at least part of it so that you can grab my attention and help me to understand it? And then I'll just quickly, we've mentioned slides before, but give some thought to your slide. And what I'm going to do, Gabriel, some of the examples I might have shown or given you, I'm going to make a list of all the 3MT resources, you know, a curated list. I'm not going to send you everything that's out there, but I'm going to annotate it and say, watch this and look what happens at 30 seconds in, if you all have that kind of interest. Okay.
That would be great. Thank you.
Because we have a stop at noon, right?
It's not a hard stop. If you
Okay.
have important things to
So-
cover, we can.
So I'm
Some
gonna
of us
send you,
will hang around.
okay, I'm gonna send you these slides, and we may have time toward the end, depending on questions, many questions there are. You can click on these links, but it's just 3 minutes. We'll probably show, because this is our 2 years ago, during the pandemic, virtual 3MT winner, Bhargav Sanketi. He went on to win. He won Cornell's. He went on to place second at the Northeastern United States Regional competition. There was an Ivy League school, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Columbia, Brown, Dartmouth. He went on to win just third place. He went on to win third place there. But the NAGS competition, the Northeastern part, the eastern part of Canada, Northeastern United States, the top two winners there get sent to the North American competition. So he was second at the Northeastern competition, but because he got to go to the North American competition, he won first place. And so what I want to find, because they're not online, because if you look at this first presentation he gave, he won at Cornell. And then I want you to see the presentation that got in second place at NAGS, but first place at the North American competition, because we were amazed how his winning competition at Cornell just got better and better and better each of the additional 2 times he presented it. And that may be very instructive. Like, what did he do to change a top place winning presentation at Cornell to continue to make it better? And then the second is not a video, but just an announcement about these various competitions. But we'll probably have time to watch that video. I've really already mentioned the content for this slide. Why all this preparation we're talking about is so important. One of the presenters at our very first year at 3 Minute Thesis at Cornell, who did not go on, he had a very good presentation in the preliminary round, but then competing in the final round at Cornell, he wasn't one of the winners. But he came back to me 3 weeks later and he said, I just interviewed for a job at Boston University. I think I saw maybe that one of you is in Boston, maybe when you put your places in chat. He said, I just interviewed for a job at Boston University and they offered it to me. And he said, I really used what I learned preparing my 3 minute thesis presentation and the workshop that the graduate school did to help students prepare. And so on the job market, at conferences, you probably won't be asked to speak for just 3 minutes, but you can take these tips and strategies and advice and apply them to a present. I remember when, again, 40 years ago, when I did my presentation for that first faculty job that I ended up getting, I remember they had a podium for me to stand at. But if you know anything, right, it's your dissertation research. And I walked from around the podium and I walked, closer to the audience. It wasn't a big audience, maybe 20 or 25 faculty and some graduate students. But I think that was one of the things that made it compelling. They expected me to stand behind a podium and read a paper. It was my dissertation. I knew it frontwards, backwards, upside down. And I felt like I could really engage with them, but on a topic that we were all interested in, and that was children's moral reasoning, how children think in situations that we would call moral dilemmas. This student won in, I think, 2019. And if you can see the title of his slide, my thesis on feces. How does he say it? My thesis on feces may make your bones stronger. And so he got a big laugh every time he talked about excrement, which you would expect from a junior high audience or something. But he had a lot of humor. And if your presentation lends itself to appropriate humor, and I knew a graduate student at University of Tennessee who actually wrote an article on using humor in the classroom, but all of his humor was inappropriate. It was gender-based, it was race-based. So the only person, just another tip, the only person you can make fun of when teaching a class is yourself. You can't be making fun of women or Italians, and this is what he did. I guess he was Italian, but still, he was not the only Italian in the room who might have been offended. But if you're going to use humor and if it's going to be directed at somebody, make fun of yourself, don't make fun of anybody else. I will never forget him for his inappropriate uses of humor and that he wrote an article on using humor in the classroom. Okay, you'll see this on the 3 Minute Thesis website. We've modified this a little bit. We use a different set of judging criteria. And I said, I'll send these slides to Jimmy or Gabriel, whoever wants them, and they can send them out to you. But this comes straight from the Queensland 3 Minute Thesis website. And if you haven't looked at that, they have advice for people who are planning a 3MT competition and advice for people who are competing. So it's a great resource site. But I would use this as a checklist. Actually print this out, make yourself a checklist. And when you write your presentation, go through and use this as a rubric. Have I done all of these things? A clear background. The biggest mistake I see students make, particularly in the preliminary rounds of 3-minute thesis at Cornell, is they don't talk enough about their research. And the judges, and I've been judge and I've been moderator back and forth many times, but the judges often write, has she actually done this research yet? Or is she just presenting her proposal? And we tell students you have to have finished your research. You don't have to have it published or written up, but you have to have some data, because the story is the beginning, middle, and end. How did you decide on the research? What did you do for the research? And what did you find after you did the research? So make sure and ask your listeners, when you practice, give them this list and say, am I doing all these things? And am I doing them all well? Because you'll see that the 3MT rubric, you get, well, it used to be, they used to break out engagement and communication. So it used to be you got 10 points for comprehension and content, 10 points for engagement, and 10 points for communication. And now they're listing it like this. So maybe their rubric is on a 20-point scale, 10 points for the things in the first, comprehension and context. But the one thing you'll notice about every one of these criteria on which you're judged, it's all about the audience, right? It's all about the audience. To you, it's about your research, and it is about your research, but it's about the audience. Can they understand clearly the background and the importance of your research? Can the audience understand, because you've clearly described your research methods, and can they understand the results, the conclusions, the outcomes, and the impact of the research? Most 3MT competitions are for PhD students, but some years when we didn't have enough PhD students who wanted, we let one year a master student won. His research was on potatoes, the difference between purple potatoes and white potatoes, and he won. And there were some people upset because they thought, how can a master's student research win over a PhD student? Well, he told a very good story. And I guess we eat a lot of potatoes in Ithaca, New York. We were very interested in potatoes. Okay, so I encourage you to watch videos of winning presentations. There are a lot of them out there. There's one that may now be, I saw it 2 years ago. It was at another school competing in the Northeastern Regional. And it may be, in my mind, the best, one of the top 3 I've ever seen. And I want to go back and find that. I couldn't find it this week. And it may not be online. I may have to write to the graduate dean and say, would you send me a copy of this? And then I will send it to you. Just everything about that presentation. I even thought the space they were in, the presenter used the space appropriately. It was psychology in my memory. Everything is just, I was blown away by how everything came together. Like, it's not just 1 or 2 things that were done well. So I want you to see that if it's available. But Queensland University in Australia has a list. They used to, in the first few years, they had a list of probably every 3-minute thesis, because they invited us to send our winner presentations to them. And it was incredible, but now there's thousands and thousands and thousands, so they probably don't have all of them. I've already said, write out your presentation and edit it. Practice it until you're really comfortable. When we went to virtual presentations, it became very hard because we told students, you're not supposed to use notes. In person, you can't use notes. And we had them sign a statement that they weren't using notes. So you really need to be comfortable with it, or you need to memorize it. But a story that flows, beginning, middle, and end, is very easy to tell. But practice. Time yourself. Make sure you're coming in under 3 minutes. Then put yourself in the most nervous of circumstances and do it and time it. A lot of us begin to speak more quickly. Some students pause because they're trying to remember the next thing to say. And, we don't really mark off points for pausing because we know then they're not using notes. They're not taking an unfair advantage in any way. But if you have to stop to pause to remember what to say next, it can easily go over 3 minutes and get feedback and then use the scoring rubric. And I'll send you the one that we use at Cornell because it's really set up like a rubric. It tells you each criteria and point value. And I'll send you that and you can just print it out or use it on your screen and actually get some of your friends to score you. Okay, I'm just going to end. I've started during the pandemic, ending with this slide, no matter what the presentation is. I know that one of you is in Bloomington. I was engaged to somebody at Indiana University in Bloomington when I was in graduate school at Purdue. I didn't end well, but that's okay. I have recovered. She lived. She persisted. She finally at age 50 got married. But these are my friends and our parents at who came to graduation are standing behind us. They're all gone now, but I'm still in touch with all of these people. And you will make friends for life. Some of them will become colleagues. You might marry one, but you'll be friends for life. So I hope you're enjoying graduate school as much as I did, and even the memories of graduate school at this point. This guy in the brown shirt, the picture on my couch, in his retirement, he's now hiking the Appalachian Trail. So every day I get a text from him with the picture on the Appalachian Trail. So when I say friends for life, and then, these are books. And so I guess email me if you want a book. One is the Productive Writer book, the Productive Graduate Student Writer. The book in the middle is called On Being a Scientist. It's published by, I think, the National Academy of Sciences. It's a very short book. Oh, wait, I think this is available as a free download online. So I'll send you the link to that. Don't pick that book. I'll actually send you electronically or paper copy of one of the real books that's not online. And then the book Choke is written by the person who used to be dean of the graduate school at University of Chicago and then president of Barnard College, and it just became president of Dartmouth University. But she did her dissertation research, and she continues to do research on high performers, like Olympic athletes, people who are at the top of their game, not to use a sports analogy, but like PhD students who are interviewing for a job or doing a presentation at a conference. What causes people who are well prepared, well trained, and highly skilled to choke? To, the use of the word choke to mean they just collapse. They totally forget their presentation. They practice. They're highly skilled. They're brilliant, but they don't do well at the moment that matters the most. That's what that book is about. Okay, I think that's the last of my slides. I want to stop sharing. And I know it's after 12. What questions do you have? What did you want us to talk about that we haven't talked about yet? And after we answer questions, I'll be glad to show Barkov's 3-minute video. It's research that some of you may be aligned with. He looks at infant intestines and what happens when these things are knotted up, and the research on that. I'm not a very good communicator of his research. What questions do you have? Oh, let me look in chat and see if the questions are appearing.
So thank you so much, Jen. That was wonderful. I want to say 2 quick things, and one of them will be a question. One is I want to relate to other people in the audience, sort of emphasize. I know you mentioned competitions all over the world, but I just want to emphasize how important this is becoming. I recently applied to a postdoctoral fellowship from Howard Hughes Medical Institute.
Mm-hmm.
To put things in perspective, that's the largest private funder of biomedical research in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And our final presentation was, I kid you not, a 3-minute presentation with only 3 slides to a room of 50 HHMI investigators. So probably the most important research presentation I will ever do in my life. it was a 3-minute presentation. So this is real.
Mhm.
That's one note, just to
When will
sort
you
of-
find out? When will you find out if you get this postdoc position?
I have it. So
They've offered it to you.
it worked. It all worked out well, and I will share it with the students in AfriSNet as well.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
HHMI has a lot of money. So it's a good organization to be on good terms with, right?
I think so. And we are actually going to do 3-minute thesis presentations ourselves, and within this group, and that was one of the reasons why we wanted to invite somebody to tell us about it before we do it. And I think your presentation was amazing and really will help a lot as we prepare.
Good, good.
But I was wondering, as we try to structure internally on how we do this, do you have a recommendation on the number of slides that people can use? Should it be just one slide? Is a few
Yes.
slides okay?
Yeah. The three, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I realize I could have told you so much more about slides. With an official 3-minute thesis presentation, there's a limit of 1 slide, no music, no animation, no movement. The official 3-minute thesis rules say that you cannot wear a t-shirt that depicts your research. You cannot dance your thesis. You cannot bring props. One student asked us, can I have a chair on the stage and I'm going to put my leg up on the chair and point to my knee? Because his research was on, knee injuries and understanding cartilage and knee movement and function. And we said, no, you can't even use a chair as a prop. He said, can I lift my knee and just point to my knee? I said, well, and we let him do that, just point to his knee. But the official rules say 1 slide, no animation, no movement in the slide, no music. It has to be, the rules even say spoken word. You can't sing, you can't dance. And I think the fun thing to do one year would be, after the 3-minute thesis presentations are done and the judges are making the decisions, then invite everybody back up on stage and say, now do the 1 minute of your presentation, that if you could use music, if you could use dance, if you could, there is a competition in Canada. I don't know how widespread it is. It's called Bake Your Dissertation. And you bake cupcakes or a cake or cookies and you decorate them. And the judges come by and you explain why this cake depicts your research, or the way you've decorated this cookie. And then one of my colleagues at Concordia University in Montreal said, well, that is just sexist. You ought to have like barbecue your dissertation or grill your dissertation, get some grilling of meat involved, and then the men will participate. And I said, and that's sexist. But I think these are fun ways, although 3-minute thesis is a very serious, as Gabriel was saying, I mean, it is practice for real life. It is real life. But some schools, so, okay, I'll have to write you this example. I'm not going to take the time to tell it, but some schools think of fun ways. There is if you're in chemistry, anybody in chemistry, there is a dance your dissertation contest. You don't have to do the dancing. You can get other people to dance, but you choreograph. And when you think of chemistry and, I don't know, like electrons and stuff like that, and the movement of stuff like that. And again, I need to take a chemistry class from a really good teacher. But Google Dance Your Dissertation. And it's sponsored by the American Chemical Society. And these students get the music, they get friends who are dancers, and they do a choreography that then is danced out to depict their research. And I think that spending a little bit of time thinking outside the proverbial box, what would my dissertation look like if I decorated a cookie to represent, or baked a cake? We had one student here who showed me a picture of a cake she made. And it's like, well, that's not a cake. That's like in geology, like a geode, and I'm not sure what that is, but I know what it looks like. I said, that can't be a cake. And she said, oh, well, yeah, but I took a wine class. And so I baked a cake that actually had a wine glass hovering, but covered in frosting over the cake, and then baked the cake that looked like wine pouring out of the glass onto the surface of the cake. And I guess it's just a stress reducer from studying enology, which is the production of wine. We actually have a class. We have a degree in enology on winemaking, because a lot of wineries up here. So it's a very practical kind of research to be doing. I think I've gotten us off topic again. Questions in chat, or questions you just want to unmute?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jan, for the very insightful presentation. In fact, I have my notes completely filled. Yeah, so I have 2 questions to just kickstart. Please, you can always come off mute as well to ask your questions. But to kickstart the whole Q&A part, I will start with 2 questions. One, is there like a distinction between the 3-minute thesis and an elevator pitch? Because sometimes people often kind of separate them. Sometimes they say it's same, other times they say it's quite different. So is there like a similarity, or is it the same thing? And that's one question. Would you want me to state the other question, or you would want to answer that first?
Well, let me ask for clarification. I understood everything you said, except you said, what's the difference between 3-minute thesis and I didn't catch what came after and I think that's really critical.
The elevator pitch.
Oh, the elevator pitch.
You're right.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good question. If you prepare a 3-minute thesis presentation, I think it makes a good elevator pitch, but your elevator pitch might need to be a 30-second version, a 1-minute version. The time I was a faculty member already, I ended up in the elevator in our administrative tower, and I knew the president. The president got on. I didn't know the person with the president, turned out to be a member of the board of trustees, and he asked me about my research, but I was in a building that only had 4 levels in it. And so it had to be a quick elevator pitch, right? I mean, 30 seconds. So I would say if you're planning to do a 3-minute thesis presentation, prepare that. And then challenge yourself to, okay, here's 3 minutes. And you got to understand, 3-minute thesis presentation, you get to have one slide, which may be hard for those of you in STEM to do. Because Gabriel even said for his 3-minute HHMI presentation, he had 3 slides, and nobody's limiting you at a conference, use some kind of movement, or, you can add to the slide as your presentation goes. But if you're in an elevator, you're not going to, I don't think you're going to pop out an iPhone or iPad or computer and say, oh, watch my PowerPoint presentation. And so the elevator pitch differs in that it's only you, and it's only you talking when you've probably been given 2 seconds notice. So what's your research about? And so you've got to have something. We had to do this again. When I was a faculty member, we changed the name of our college, and our dean would stop us in the hall because she'd said, you have to have a 30-second answer to this question, because alumni, students, people in Knoxville, Tennessee on the street are going to say, hey, I heard that such and such college is going away, and now there's this brand new college and nobody knows what this name means. The new name was human ecology. Well, come on, human. And you have to know something about systems to know what ecology means, right? And I guess that's what she was afraid about, nervous about. And she would stop us in the hall. I'd be walking down the hall and I'd see Dean Nancy Belk, and she said, give me your 30-minute description of what the new name means. And it's like, really, we don't have enough to do here that we're going to be challenged by our dean in the hallway? But that's one of the differences. But I would suggest once you get your 3-minute, and I'm so glad you asked this, because I'm going to start telling our students here at Cornell this very thing that I've never said before. Prepare a 3-minute thesis presentation, and then for fun, Do a 2-minute version, do a 1-minute version, and do a 30-second version. And you don't have to memorize all of those, but in the moment, is it an elevator and you're going up 26 floors? You're going up 4 floors. Do I need the 30-second version, or is this going to be a 3-minute version? And I think the big difference is the time you have to prepare, because if you find yourself in an elevator or at a conference, you go on a job interview and you're going to give a job talk later in the day, but you run into somebody who says, I teach at the same time. Give me your 2-minute version of your job talk. Seriously, my job talk is 30 minutes with another 20 minutes for questions and discussions. You want the 2-minute version of my job talk? Well, yeah, you got to have something like that. Let me give you one tip about this. This is what I tell students when they're writing fellowship applications. I can always read something and almost be certain whether it was written by a faculty member or written by a student. Here's how I can tell. A faculty member will say, I study the impact of social interactions on children's moral reasoning. They use a subject and a verb. I study, I research. Graduate students write or say something like this. The purpose of my research is designed to try to determine if positive and social interactions influence the kind of moral reasoning preschoolers exhibit. Now, what do you think about that sentence? Does it sound like by the time I get to the end of that sentence, that if you tell me you don't like it, I'll say, okay, I'll change my research. I'll do something else. I know you don't like it. I saw that look on your face. It is not a look that is very satisfying to me. So if you don't like that, I will change it. Graduate students, when we are graduate students, we tend to write so tentatively. We want to convince people that we know enough about this, that maybe they should give us money or HHMI fellowship or own it. Even if a faculty member comes and says, that's a bunch of junk. I just don't think you should study that. Feedback is a gift. You've got to start getting accustomed to feedback is a gift. The person may be a total jerk telling you that's awful, that's garbage, you can't do research on that, or that's not ambitious enough, that's too ambitious, you'll never get that finished. And you don't have to like the person in the moment, but it really, unless a faculty member is truly pathological and they're trying to destroy your soul, and if they are, someone in the graduate school wants to know about that. They're going to want to protect you, and at the very least be able to support you through working with an advisor who's a total numbnut. I don't like to swear, so I have substitutes for swear words or bad words. As a woman who grew up in the South, a woman of a certain age, grew up Southern Baptist, I don't swear. But there are some faculty whose mentoring style just, drives you to drink, and I don't do that either, having grown up Southern Baptist, drive you to drink and drive you to swear. But you don't have to like the person giving you the feedback, but try to think, well, what can I learn from this? I used to teach in Head Start. I don't know if you're familiar with the Head Start program in the United States. And I wanted to grow up to be a high school teacher, and it was working with 3- and 4-year-old children that had to go back and get degrees in child development and child psychology to understand what those 3- and 4-year-old children were trying to teach me about how children grow and learn and develop. But even in giving feedback to children, it has to be constructive and supportive. And when children misbehave, are they really misbehaving, or they just made a mistake? Did you ever tell them? I don't know what I did with my glass of water, but it never got to my desk here. But I would halfway demonstrate this. Did you ever tell your 3-year-old not to take a glass of milk and pour it on top of the dog? Now, seriously, did you ever really tell him not to pour milk on the dog? No, you probably didn't. So they just made a mistake, or they lacked instruction. I was babysitting for my advisor when she and her husband went away to celebrate their 10th anniversary, and she had a 7-year-old son. And I walked outside, he was playing in the backyard and he was on the roof of the garage. And I said, what are you doing? That's so dangerous. Because maybe I should have been watching a 7-year-old like constantly, but it was in the backyard with the sandbox and swing set. He said, well, Mama never told me not to jump off the garage. Well, okay, let's start there. But I, working with young children for so long, I try to see their misbehavior as mistaken behavior. It's just mistaken behavior. It's just a mistake and they need guidance. In some cases, children have been so horribly mistreated and abused that they're, particularly when it involves violence against other children, they're demonstrating what they've seen, what they've been taught. So some of this applies to graduate students. The feedback may come to you not in the best of ways, but what can you learn from it? It's a mistake. It's not like you ever did a dissertation before and now you're doing a second one and you should know how to do it, right? You've already done this research, so you're just for fun going to repeat it. I know you have to replicate research, but you're usually doing something for the first time. So you should have a very supportive, constructive advisor, but I've gotten off the topic. So Jimmy, I do remember that you had a second question. What is it?
Yeah, I think before the second question, I would probably just ask the question Stephanie posted. Then probably with time I would ask the second question. So Stephanie asked concerning the images in the 3-minute thesis for the slide. She was asking if we need to reference external sources or you just design it. It's mostly designed by you.
Stephanie, that's a really good question. I don't remember any citations or sources on the slide, because then that gets really busy if you're using the work of somebody else and you have to use a citation. So my suggestion would be try to prepare a slide that is of your own research and your own creation. And in fact, while we talk, I'm going to, can you see this? I think we see Barkov's slide. Yep, here's his slide. So this is his own work, his own design. This is the to be or not to be. The humor here, I guess, is the Shakespeare quote, which is to be or not to be. But his research is on knots. When infants are born, their intestines can be knotted up. Gut rotation and blood supply in the embryo. What do you think of this slide? Like I've already told you, he's won some competitions with it. Is it too complicated? Does it add? Because I'll send you the link and you can watch his presentation knowing he's won 3 different competitions with this presentation. But I'll try to send you what we have is the Cornell presentation, but he got better each of the 2 times he presented it and continued to win until he won the North American one. Look at the slides that you see online associated with presentations. They're probably all good examples. Sometimes I find slides, particularly in STEM fields, which is not, I'm social science, a little complicated. And the tendency with one slide, right, is to put everything in there. You're thinking, well, if they let me use 3 slides, I could make it simple, but Jan, I can't make it simple if it's only one slide. So I would say most 3MC slides I've ever seen don't cite the work of somebody else, and I don't think that's expected. And if the question is really, if your work is based on, like if your slide is showing your work, but if it's based on somebody else's work, no, you don't have to use citations or references in any way. People understand that you have a very limited amount of space and information you can put on a slide. So Stephanie, let me know if I didn't answer the question you were really asking. Esther.
I have one question, and it has to do with your hand mannerisms when you're presenting. I want you to kind of comment on that, because I've seen people who are really good with their hand gestures and others that use their hand gestures, but it looks a little bit distractive. And you might not really focus on what they're saying, but on what they're doing with their hands. So it might seem a little bit trivial, but could you comment on that during your time as a judge during the 3 minutes presentation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's not trivial. And maybe you were reading my mind yesterday. I should be embarrassed to admit this, but I was in a meeting at Cornell in person yesterday with a vice provost, and she happened to be female. And I sat right next to her, and I was watching her hands the whole time. I can't tell you much of what she said, but I was watching her hands. And in my mind, the reason I can't tell you much of what she said is I was having this internal conversation like, oh, do women use their hands more often than men? The three people I can think of who use their hands the most, she's one of them. One of them is my colleague, where everything, every word, it's almost like if they knew sign language, every word is this or this, you know, they're describing almost every word they're using with a hand gesture. And I'm now aware, I think I've used my hands a lot in this presentation. So maybe I was distracting, and that's why you're asking the question. But this vice provost yesterday, I thought, do people think her presentation is less valuable or less smart? Because her hands are just all over the place. That was probably a little exaggeration, but we often say when we give students feedback, sometimes so they don't use their hands, they'll put their hands in the pocket, but there's a paperclip or there's a coin or there's a key. I remember one presentation, the presenter jangled his keys the whole time. It kept him, you know, it kept him from using his hands out of his pockets, but he was just using his hands in his pockets. So that's something you need to practice. Stand in front of a mirror or ask somebody to watch you. I think some hand gestures are appropriate. Sometimes you can use them for emphasis. I'm trying to think, all of those with cameras on, what would a hand gesture used for emphasis look like? No, that's not it. This, I do this a lot when I talk. What are you doing, Samuel? Do it again. Yeah. Like, okay, so, and what would we be saying with our hands? This is a good way to do it. So there, you know, you're getting to your conclusion, you're talking about the implications, you do something like that. It's saying, there you have it, or so there. You could use a shrug. Researchers had never thought to ask this question. Why not? You know, that's body language. It doesn't say you can't use body language or hand gestures, but Esther, you've got it perfectly right. Are they distracting? See, why am I doing this? Perfectly right, meaning the one thing that may be most important with body language. The one that, no, why did I do that? You know, I think, oh, if you can tape yourself, now that we're all experts on Zoom, tape yourself, watch yourself. If the competition is virtual, you know, I probably would keep my, like, do you know what I'm doing with my hands right now? They're clasped and I have them around my knees. I've got my feet up on my computer. I said it was a desk. I wanted you to think I had a real desk. My computer is up on the tallest stool, bar stool I have. I don't have a bar at my house, but I have a bar stool. I use them as plant stands. So the computer is up on that and it's a pretty good height. But I've got my feet, so my legs will probably go numb soon, up on the bottom rung of the stool, and I've clasped my hands around my knees. And I'm going to see how long I can leave them before I unclasp them and start talking with my hands. But then you may say, something's wrong with her. She never used her hands. We never saw her hands in the presentation. But yeah, look at your body language. If it's a virtual presentation, we're told to look at the camera. Can you tell the difference? Look at where I'm looking now. And look at where I'm looking now. Could you tell a difference? The first time I was looking at the camera, and I've never done a Zoom presentation looking at the camera. I guess I could train myself. There's a little white light where the camera is. Or maybe I need to tape a photograph. I shouldn't show you this photograph. It was taken at my 20-year high school reunion. And in fact, one of the girls in the photograph just called me about 5 minutes ago. And I saw that her name lit up on my phone, but her back went out. after all the work she did for their 20-year high school reunion. And we were in a hotel suite for the last night of the event. You know, there was just food and probably a football game on TV that Saturday night. And she went and lay in the bed. And then everybody else decided to pile in the bed with her. So that's what that photograph is. But I guess you could tape a photograph right where you're, you know, right behind your camera to remind you to look at the camera. But the first time I looked at the camera, and then the second time I turned and looked at Gabriel. Jimmy's right under my camera. So this is me looking at the camera. This is me looking at Jimmy. And I don't know if you can tell the difference. Camera, Jimmy, camera, Jimmy. But when I looked at Gabriel, I turned my head. And so record yourself. And I mean, when I look at my recordings, it's like I am all over the screen. That's not what the recording needs to show. So again, don't procrastinate. Start early enough and fine tune some of these. Oh, I unclasped my hands when I grabbed for the picture. But I think body language and the use of your hands, and I don't know, let's all do a quasi experiment. Start watching in real life or on Zoom. I think women may use their hands more than men. There's probably a research study out there. Years ago, somebody told me I was always playing with my hair. And when I get nervous, I do this. Now I got my hands knotted up. I do this, I twirl my hair. Usually boredom, not always nervousness. In meetings, I might do this. And I've really broken that habit because somebody said, we were at a leadership institute and I was one of the leaders and of a group of 10 faculty and administrators. And last night, they all have to put on skits. And one of them got yellow crepe paper and played the role of me and had this long blonde hair. And the whole time they were doing this with the yellow crepe paper. I said, what were you doing? He said, you play with your hair all the time. And men don't do that. Men never do that. And maybe women with short hair don't do it. And I've stopped touching my hair. I know I've done this a couple of times. But women touch their hair. Men don't. And that's one of the gender differences that I think accounts for our impressions and reactions to presentations, to our judgment about who's more knowledgeable.
I think Esther's question probably leads to a very important discussion here. What I kind of wanted to also point out that we shouldn't think that all COVID is over. Things are going to go back in person. These virtual meetings are here to stay. The competition that I mentioned was virtual. And so practicing things like looking at the camera, as you mentioned, knowing your body position versus your camera or how high you're sitting, the background, other things, especially if you only have 3 minutes and you don't want to distract people, it's very important.
Absolutely. I'm still surprised what I see. I love seeing children and animals in Zoom meetings, but if you're interviewing for a job, well, if you're interviewing for a job with me, you can have your 3-year-old on your lap during the interview, and I'm going to be fine with that. But some of you may watch TV, and I was watching a news program the other day, one of the news networks, and someone who was quite well known, I didn't know him, so I can't tell you his name, but he was well known enough to be interviewed on MSNBC, and clearly he was traveling, he was in a hotel room, but he was sitting, maybe there was only one place to sit in the room, but he was sitting at the desk in the room, and all you could see behind him was this big old queen-size bed. And I remember I had a different dean when the pandemic started, and she did all of her Zoom meetings from the basement where they had a guest bedroom. We saw her cat a lot, that was fun, but there was a bed and a quilt. And it's like, I'm just really surprised. So my Zoom from home, I didn't go into the office for this, is I'm on the landing of I have a two-story place. I'm on the landing of my stairs. It means you can't see any of my furniture. What you see back over there is the loft living room. So there's nothing on the wall on that high loft living room. This is the banister to my stairs. And there is a a light behind me, which is not good, but I keep the blinds closed. But there's a window right there. And as long as it's daylight, I have a ring light, but I don't need to use it, I don't think. But Gabriel, I think that's very important that, again, it's kind of who's the audience. Is the audience 200 people in an auditorium in front of you? Or is your audience 20 to 200 people on a Zoom call? And so you do practice on Zoom. And I agree with you. I talk about how much work it is to put on a 3MT. We're thinking about continuing it in Zoom. Not just because it's easier, but we loved that our competitors, our students, parents, you could tell some of them were grandparents who had never been on a Zoom call before. But they had family from around the world. Some of these people must have been up at 4 o'clock in the morning, watching our Cornell 3-minute thesis presentation. But we loved the fact that this was, I guess we could still live stream or broadcast it, but almost everybody with a phone or an iPad or a computer can access it. You just click on a link. You don't have to do much. And so we may continue with a virtual format as well. Other questions? I want you to feel comfortable leaving. You don't have to stay on just because I'm still talking, but I can stay as long as you want me to.
All right, thank you, Jen. Sorry, before we continue with the questions, I would want to take a screenshot of my screen. So I don't know if everyone could turn on their camera briefly. I'll just take a screenshot. I don't know if you find it. All right, thank you guys.
Can I take a picture too?
Sure, no problem.
I know I could take a screenshot, but I actually use my iPhone to take a picture. Oh my gosh, it's so good to see you all. The reason I know some people probably have left, and Gabriel can help me. I just copied the chat, and I'm gonna make sure I have the name of everybody who attended.
I will have the script of the chat and everyone who requested for the ebook for the Henrietta's book and everything. So we can, and if we'll give you all the. We'll have the chat.
Okay, and then I can. If you're in the US, it's very easy for me to mail you an actual copy of the book, But if you're not in the US, it's a little bit harder. And if you prefer an e-copy, obviously I have e-copies of this book that I can send, but we'll figure out, and some of the books are available online, the National Academy of Sciences book. Anybody can download that, and I'll make sure. And there are several other books that I didn't write that I know are available online. And I'll send you links to those with a little bit of annotation about why I think it's a good book. But we'll make sure that all of you get at least something.
All right, thank you, Jen. We're still waiting for some people. It's fine if you don't want to turn on your camera, but I think we'll wait for about 10 seconds. And if your camera isn't on, we just take the picture nevertheless. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I'll take the picture. 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much, guys. Yeah.
Nobody looked unpresentable. You guys all look good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mark, it's so good to see you.
Good to see you too. Gabriel, been a long time.
It's been a while. Thank you for joining. How are things in Ghana?
We're keeping well. Had a couple of colleagues joining us as well. They were here.
Awesome.
Sorry,
Gabriel. Oh, so you had people in the room with you?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, that's great. Fantastic.
Yeah, sorry, Gabriel. It's not giving me permission to do that. I don't know if you can do that because you're the host.
To take the picture?
Right.
Oh, okay. I have a little tool that I use to. Let me go in the full screen. I have a little tool that I use on my computer to snap the picture.
Okay.
All right. So let's see. Everybody smile. I have it.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay.
So I want to know, who is from wherever you're zooming in today, zooming in at like the worst possible time, like it's 2 a.m. or you had to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to do this? Mark, what time is it where you are?
It's 45 minutes past 4
In the
p.m.
afternoon?
Yes, in the afternoon.
I
Okay.
think we have
Ghana.
somebody in China.
Ghana, West Africa.
Claudien is in China. I don't know if he can hear us. But I know he's in China, Beijing.
In China.
Yeah.
Tula, what time is it where you are?
Oh, yes. Hello, everyone. It's almost 1 a.m. in China.
Oh, well, thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you to attend this conference. It is so nice. I got many things. For sure, all of them is new to me. Even if 15 minutes for my thesis used to be short. And then this time I learned a lot about the 3 minutes thesis. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining. Glad you were able to make it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Tina had a question because I saw a hand was raised. Tina, would you want to go now?
Tina?
Okay. Okay, I think pending when do any one of us have any other question?
Well, I didn't hear what time Petula said it was where she was.
Oh, hi. I'm in Bloomington, so it's probably the same time. It's like 12:47 p.m.
Yeah, so you're Central Time Zone. Indiana, how long have you been in Indiana?
It's been about a year now.
Because there are parts of Indiana that go on daylight saving time and parts that don't.
Okay.
And I was at Purdue for 4 years, so I lived in Indiana.
Oh, wow.
And the time change thing was very unusual because you could live one place but shop 5 minutes away and it would be in different time zones. And I know that happens where time zones, demarcations are, but it was very unusual because part of the state chose not to go on daylight savings time and you had to keep up with it.
Yeah, that was very it was very unlikely. Like, we don't have like time savings or anything in Kenya. So I was like, what do you mean we lost 1 hour? What do you mean we gained 1 hour?
But do you like living in Bloomington? I think that's probably the coolest, hippest city, the coolest place to be.
I like it. It's a really chill college town, and I like it. The weather is not the best, especially when it's cold, but I'm thinking that this is not the coldest place in the US probably, so like it's fine.
Yeah.
So I like it. Yeah,
It's good to meet you.
good to meet you too. Thank you for your insightful presentation. We learned a lot, especially the last week I had a 30-second elevator pitch for my thesis proposal, and I was actually very impressed that most of the students were able to cover like most of their, the parts of their presentation, cover the general knowledge, the big question, the gap, and approach in just 30 seconds. I was like, wow, okay, maybe the 3 minutes will be fine if I was able to do that in like just 30 seconds. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, guys. Just one more thing. I remember I said I had 2 questions. So here is my other question, since there's no other person I want to ask the question. So earlier, I wanted to ask about the aspects of memorization of your presentation, because personally, I just like practicing, but I do not memorize because I often have the issue of missing one word, and that word makes everything, go out of place. So what do you think about memorization of your presentation of slides, and also in terms of the STAR technique? People often talk about the STAR approach when you're bringing in your the situation, task, actions, and result, Did we implement that also in a presentation of the 3-minute thesis? Do you talk about the situation, then talk about the task or your research, and then talk about like an approach, what you did in the research and the results of your research? You know, do you do that?
Yeah. So I'll talk about the memorization first. I don't encourage students to memorize unless that feels very comfortable and natural, and they feel like it reduces some of the anxiety knowing they have it memorized. Because exactly what you said, if you've memorized it and you come to a part in it where you can't remember what comes next, there is often a long pause just trying to remember. I don't memorize things. I try to talk through things, but this is more like my learning style. When I was a freshman in college, I would read things, or I would take lecture notes in class, you know, notes from the lecture. And then I would come home and I would just try to pretend I was teaching a class using that material, you know, and then that helped me retain the material. It helped me understand the material, and it helped me to, you know, get it in my brain in a way that made sense to me. And I didn't know what to call that, but I'll later learn that's called comprehension. I mean, you have to understand it, and then you have to be able to use it. My use of it was, I did this as a kid. I would gather up my younger sister and kids in the neighborhood, and in the summer we would play school, and I always had to be the teacher, and I was always teaching and lecturing. I can't believe I was that controlling. Hope we had some fun in those fake schools in the summer. But I don't memorize, and what I do encourage you to write it out. And some of you may find it works better for you to handwrite it. What do you remember better? Like, if you're trying to remember something, is it something you've seen printed in a book? Do you remember this? I'm looking to see if I have anything handwritten. I tend to remember things better if I've written them out by hand. And so we don't write anything out by hand anymore, right? Particularly related to our research or our schoolwork. But if I write something out by hand, there's something about my brain retrieving the process of writing, and it's very different than the process of typing. There's actually, someone has done some research about note-taking. And if you'll just humor me a minute or two to talk about this, I think it helps with a 3-minute thesis presentation, although I've never really made the connection. So how many of you, if you have a book, you'll take a pencil or pen and you'll underline what you think is important? I mean, we used to do that even before, and I had to look this up because I don't have a highlighter. I have a pencil that's neon yellow, which is like when I say a highlighter, there's neon green or pink or orange, but most of them are neon yellow, and they're those markers, and you go through and you highlight the stuff you think is important. I said I never used highlighters because as a kid, we didn't have a lot of money. We didn't get to buy many books. I remember one book my mother bought. We'd go to the library and we'd check out books, but I didn't own the book. So I didn't write in the book. I didn't highlight. And I thought, oh my gosh, what if highlighters had not been invented when I was a kid? That's why I didn't use a highlighter in college, because they hadn't been invented yet. So I actually looked it up. Highlighters were first sold in 1963. I could tell you I was 10 years old then, but so when I was in college, 8 years later, I still didn't highlight because there's something bad about writing in a book to me. And when I have now published books and people say, sign them, I say, oh, really? You want me to write in a book? And it's like, oh, I have a hard time doing that, but I do sign them and write a little note if they want to know. But the research has found that just reading a book and doing nothing else, or reading a book and highlighting or underlining, get you about the same result in how much you remember about what you've read. And I think it's because we don't use our brain very much, right? We don't engage our brain. Hey, if some of you are doing brain research or in cognitive science, please correct anything I say. But there is some research that says if you just read or if you read and underline or read and highlight, your retention of that material is about the same. If you want to retain more of what you read to be able to use later, you know, for an exam. I don't know if in graduate school you're still taking many exams, but if you're in medical school, some graduate classes, they still require that you write an exam, and it's not a take-home exam. That if you take notes on what you read and then you type notes, you'll remember more of what you read. But the thing that helps you the most to remember is you take notes by hand. Your brain is working in a different way. And I think it's because you're doing more of the work, right? When you're just typing, your fingers are doing the work. I don't know how much your brain, because you probably have the keyboard memorized. So you almost can type without thinking, but when you handwrite, you are thinking about spelling and formatting and appearance of your own handwriting on the page. See, I did this when I started college. My very first college class was a communications class. And I took the first exam, and the instructor called me into her office afterwards. And she said, if you keep up working like this, you will ace the class. And I nodded my head and walked out of the room because I didn't know what aced the class meant. I didn't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. I didn't know that acing a class meant making an A. I had no idea. But she was kind of complimenting me on how much, when I wrote this exam, I remembered. Because what I did was and we did not have computers. Not even when I wrote my dissertation 4, 5, 6, 10 years later did we have computers. I did my dissertation on a typewriter. But when I prepared for class, I wrote out notes of what I thought was important. And then when I went to hear, to the class and heard the lecture, I wrote down what she said. And then at night, I took my notes from the readings and my notes from the lectures, and I rewrote them into a combined document. And then you'll think I'm crazy, but I would pace my dorm room pretending to lecture from what I remembered. Like if I was going to give a lecture on, well, this was a communication class. I remember almost nothing from that class, but in every class, after I would do my readings or listen to the lecture, I would just walk up and down, pace, because I'm a very kinesthetic learner. I use movement a lot. And I would try to remember by pretending I was giving a presentation or a lecture. But that really solidified my memory, my understanding of things. And I didn't know that later Peg Single would write about the research on note-taking to say that if you can engage in as many ways as possible. And when I went to study for an exam, I didn't go back and read the book, which many people try to do the night before, particularly if they haven't done the readings in the first place. But I would just go back over my notes, and they would be very familiar because I would have practiced teaching a class or giving a presentation. I guess I was planning to be a teacher from birth. But the thing that worked for me turned out to be a very engaged way. You read the material, you listen to the material, you write out notes, you rewrite your notes. I engaged with that material a lot. And so what does this have to do with 3-minute thesis? I would say handwrite, even if you type it, then as you get the presentation to under 3 minutes and it tells a story and you like your amount of humor and enthusiasm and where you get very serious and where you get very passionate, then handwrite that out. And for me, I would be able to, because I think a 3-minute presentation is better for most people if it's not memorized, but they've practiced enough. They use the modality of writing the final copy. And if you can't remember what comes next, you can switch and think of something else that logically or naturally comes next. And you can give a great, and you have to practice your presentation that way. Practice what happens if you don't remember something. What do you throw in? Or what do you skip? And are you quick on your feet? You can come back later. And don't say, oh, I made a mistake, or I forgot to say. That's another tip. Nobody knows what you were going to say. When I coach students on 3-minute presentations, I have them send me what they wrote in advance. So I do know what they were going to say, because I will as I watch them speak, I'll also have the script in front of me and I'll write down a quick note, but I will, to give them feedback, but I'll know if they skipped something and I'll know how they recovered. And so practice that. If you know your presentation very well, actually practice forgetting something. What are you going to do? Your face, you don't want to grimace. You don't want to react. Go to the next thing you remember. And if you can think on your feet, come back. You say, when I was actually doing the research, and tell a story about what happened, make it a story, turn it into a story, but it's what you were going to say earlier, but forgot to say, if you know you have enough time, because you can't have paused or grimaced or done this, or, oh, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Try not to describe. I'm really bad about this, I think, when I'm doing presentations. And I hate it when I say, okay, let me find my slide now. Okay, well, this is not working. Give me another second. I don't need to narrate what's not working. Silence is okay sometimes. And then, Jimmy, tell me again real quick, your second question.
Yeah, it was about the START approach, the situation, task, action, and results. Do we also implement it while we are presenting in the 3 minute thesis?
I appreciate you saying that. Situation, task, result. I've never heard that before. So I don't use that. I'm gonna have to Google that and learn more about it and decide if it's useful for some of my coaching of students. I think what you do is go back to what we said on the slide. What's your flow? I mean, you may talk about how you got interested in the research. Very clearly state what your research question or hypothesis was. You may not say this is my hypothesis, but I set out to try to determine, or I did research on the impact of changing climate patterns on the growth of wheatgrass. Something as simple as that, that's kind of your hypothesis. It's definitely your research question. You talk a little bit about your methods and what you found. And if what you found was surprising, if you can fit that in, it's like, well, I wouldn't know what you expected to find, but look, we're in the same boat because you didn't find what you expected to find either. You kind of equalize the audience. You're saying, we all are surprised. I've given research presentations before, and I forget on what, but I use some examples of every famous inventor or every famous discoverer of the 1900s and some in the 2000s, what they set out to find and what they actually found. What is it? Teflon, Gore-Tex. We can make a long list of, there's some adhesive product. I think sticky notes. The inventor started out to figure out something, and he ended up with sticky notes. He wasn't going to invent sticky notes, but it's okay if your research didn't end up the way that you thought it would. And so it's okay to mention this was a surprise to me. You think you're surprised. Imagine my surprise when I didn't get the result that I wanted, but here's what I did instead. I mean, that makes for an interesting story. So I'm going to Google that: situation, task,
Action.
result. Is that it? Action, situation,
Task,
task,
action.
action, result. That's the
Yeah,
star.
as in star.
Okay.
Yeah.
The star. I couldn't figure out what the A was. I forgot action.
Okay. All right.
But you could craft it around that. Again, start early enough and craft it around the situation, task, action, result. Is it satisfying to you? Or is there a different way to get it to flow? Is there a different way to organize it? Is there a different approach to take?
Okay.
Because there's not one way to go. And if you, the nice thing, these are just 3 minutes. So you can, in 30 minutes time, you could watch 10 presentations and see how they do it, But I will send, I know I have Gabriel's email address. Send it to you, Gabriel, or if you want to send me Jimmy's, I can copy both of you. But I'll annotate a sheet like I think these are the best presentations to watch, and here's some best tips. Because almost every graduate school that does a 3-minute thesis competition. They give advice to their students. I'll tell you, one year I went through we had 30 people participate in the preliminary round, and the judges gave them all feedback. And I went through so we had at least 3 judges for 30 people. That's 90 sets of evaluations. And I went through all those and I added my notes because I watched them all. I think I was the moderator, but I watched all 30 presentations. And I made a list of the most commonly given advice to correct things that didn't go well in the preliminary round. And I'm going to find that and I'll send it to you as well. I've kind of forgotten about it. I don't even know if I gave it to our students last year, but I'll update it with any other advice that maybe you prompted me to think about with your questions and comments today. And I'll send you that list too.
That'd be great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was great. Very helpful, very insightful. We'll probably take some of your advice and guidelines and use them as instructions as we prepare for our own internal 3-minute thesis.
Well, and if you want me to come back and do anything else, I'm happy to do it. I've just really enjoyed this. I think you said you copied chat.
I have the chat saved, so I'll have all
Okay.
the messages and the people that would like to have the books and
Good.
everything else. And you have my email. I'll probably also include Jimmy's email as well, so we'll be able to distribute everything to the participants for sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And if there's anything I can do, and I'll be in touch to figure out, do we just invite our Cornell students from an African nation to join this group, or do we start our own little group? But we'll talk about that later.
That would be
I'm
great.
just
Yeah.
very impressed with
Yeah.
all of you and with what you're doing and your mission. And I
Thank
will
you.
get off now in case y'all want to have a board meeting or talk among yourselves.
We're pretty much done here, but the easiest thing to do is people can register through our website, and then we'll have the information. We'll keep them in the loop on our.
I saw that, and I didn't know if
Yeah.
I could register and get on a mailing list, or if I'm not really eligible to register because I'm not a graduate student and I'm not from an African nation.
That's good to know. Anybody can register on our website. Yes.
So if I want to keep in touch and learn more about this and maybe encourage our students at Cornell, registering would be okay.
For sure.
And I can encourage our students to register as well.
Yes, it really means 3 things. It means somebody wants to stay engaged and help. It means that somebody just wants to stay informed and kept in the loop of what we are doing through our newsletters. Or it means somebody needs our help. There's a specific question that everybody answers when they register. That is if they need help for grad applications, and then we keep record of that and follow up.
Okay, it sounds wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
You guys are doing such good work. I'm so impressed.
Thank you.
Okay.
And we'll definitely keep in touch. Again, pleasure to have you. And thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge and wisdom. Very
You're
helpful.
welcome. And congratulations to you and your wife and your 3-year-old daughter on your soon to be new family member.
Thank you so much.
That's exciting. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, bye. Thank you so much, guys, for waiting and for your patience. Really do appreciate that. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Good to see you, Batula.
Good to see you too, Gabriel. Congratulations again.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, congratulations.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
All right, bye. Thank you.